Welcome, welcome. My name is Whitney or Whit. I am a GMAT Jerry and executive assessment instructor here at Manhattan Prep, and I am excited to spend this Sunday, November 17th with y'all. We're nearing the end of the year, 2024. I cannot believe. Um, we have kind of an interesting but challenging topic on the agenda this evening. So it is a continuation of a multi-part series I started back in the summer in June, but kind of veered away from for a bit to finish out some quant work, and we are back. So tonight we are doing verbal. We are looking at the verbal question type critical reasoning. So let's go ahead and jump in. So this evening's plan, we'll be talking about the critical reasoning question type. We will do a quick review of critical reasoning and the critical reasoning process. And then we're going to focus in on our second critical reasoning question type. So our first critical reasoning question type was inference. We did that back in June. So make sure if you are watching the recording to check it out. It is in our free prep hours here on the YouTube site. If you're here live, welcome. You do not need to have attended the first one for this one to make sense. So we will go briefly over the process of critical reasoning just to get back up to speed. And then we're going to look at a bold-faced question type. We'll look at several examples. One of the more challenging, I'd argue, examples of critical reasoning, but it does help us get into this idea of arguments as we'll move into later types of questions, our assumptions, strengthen, weaken, and so on. And then we are going to do a little tip tonight for assessing the boldface statements themselves, some ways of thinking about how to engage with boldface. So a little friendly reminder about the GMAT. The GMAT focus has 3 sections: verbal, quantitative, and data insights. Within the verbal section, there are 2 question types: standard time, 45 minutes to answer 23 questions, where you have about a 50-50 mix of critical reasoning and reading comprehension. Critical reasoning are going to be the single paragraph, single questions, whereas reading comp are like longer 2+ paragraph passages where you'll have to answer 2 to 4 questions about that passage. And so again, we'll usually have about 4 reading comp passages with 3 to 4 questions each. And then the remaining 10 to 13 questions will be made up of our critical reasoning questions. Our approximate time will be 2 minutes per question. So I'll be working to give you about that here this evening. I'll give you a little over since we're practicing some of the more difficult question types, but you are targeting that 2-minute per question average. So let's talk about the critical reasoning process itself. So when we encounter critical reasoning questions, so that's the questions that'll have a paragraph at the top, and then we'll have a single question and then 5 answer choices. Our job is to first identify which kind of broad type of question we're in. So yes, we want to acknowledge this is critical reasoning, but then we want to say, like, which subtype of critical reasoning are we looking at? And we talked about these last time, but this will be things like inference, or draw conclusions, another way of saying that. Find the assumption, strengthen, weaken, evaluate, find the discrepancy, and then things like boldface. So boldface is probably the easiest to identify because you're going to be able to like see it. A part of the argument will literally be bolded. And that's only true for these boldface questions. So we will immediately know that we are in a boldface. We don't even have to read the question. It'll say describe the role, but we don't even have to read it. We'll know that we're in a boldface. Step 2, our job is then to deconstruct the argument. And so deconstructing the argument means go and read the argument passage at the top. A couple of little specialty rules that we'll start to add. We want to really assess the role of the bolds in relation to the argument. Now, that said, we have to start by understanding what the argument is about. Like, what are the conclusions? What is the argument using to try and strengthen or weaken those conclusions, so that we can figure out what in the world the bolds are doing. Now, the most complicated arguments on the exam are the arguments inside boldface. If we're given an argument for other question type, other critical reasoning types like assumption, strengthen, weaken, those are typically a little bit less convoluted. There's fewer twists and turns. There's also not as much of an expectation on us knowing the specific role of any one piece. Like I don't have to be able to put something and go, okay, that's working for the conclusion or that's working against it. These boldface, however, do require this level of deconstruction, but it's kind of a more creative deconstruction. So we'll spend some time with that. So you work to kind of assess the big picture of the argument and figure out how the boldface pieces fit in. And then your job is to pause and sort of really kind of state that not just goal, but like what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. So I need to know that the first bold is this and the second bold is this, and here's how I'm going to process through my answer choices. And then we will move to the very end, which is process of elimination. Right. So we'll kind of engage in a process of elimination. So let's first take a look at an argument. This argument is maybe a little bit more straightforward than we would expect some of these kind of harder CR arguments, but it's a good place to get started just to kind of see an example. And then we'll look at what it means to kind of break an argument apart. All right, so critical reasoning, again, we'll always have this structure of like the paragraph at the top, followed by, maybe the question or a blank in the middle, and then 5 answer choices. We'll know it's boldface because it'll have 1 or 2 sentences bolded. Yeah, so we'll know it's boldface. Our job now, deconstruct the argument. So let's take a look at the argument without the bold. I would love for you to take a minute, and your job in this first minute is to just kind of generically understand what's happening, what's kind of being argued. And that's it, right? I don't need anything fancy. I don't need you to identify anything, but just kind of like take in the big picture of the argument. All right, let's go in the chat. I would love to get a sense of like, first, what do you think the argument's conclusion is? So I've broken this up into 4 sentences, basically. If you were going to say that one of these sentences was the argument's conclusion, which one would it be? Go ahead and put this in the public or private chat, either one. Okay. And what is it then, as you're typing, since many of you are, what is it that is sort of signaling to you that the conclusion is number 4? Y'all are exactly right. The conclusion is number 4. What's the signal? How can I tell? Maybe it's just that you know it. So we often get language like therefore, right? Conclusion language. Therefore, so, in conclusion, we get conclusion. Also things like claim, believe. Yeah, it's an opinion. Yeah. So in the world of these critical reasoning arguments, I tend to break things into two very generic types of information. Fact information that might be called like fact or evidence, and then belief information that could be a claim, a conclusion, an interpretation, right? But we think of them as two separate things, kind of facty sorts of things and belief sorts of things. Now, if we're going to come up with a conclusion, whether it's like the argument's final conclusion, like the big sales pitch, or some intermediary conclusions along the way, a conclusion is always a belief, right? If the author is coming up with a conclusion, it is always a belief, right? It's an opinion. Now, all of those things, intermediary conclusions, right? Conclusions that support the final conclusion, those things can all be beliefs. They can be opinions. Some of that support, though, could be evidentiary, right? Some of the support could be literal fact. And so one of the things that we want to look for, especially as we're kind of assessing, once we decide what is bold and like what we're going to do with it, is this bold thing fact? Is it a given as a fact, as a statement of truth, or is it a belief, like a claim? Yeah. So our bold is this guy right here in the middle, number 3. Would y'all argue that this bold is an opinion or a fact? So I'm ignoring whether it's like in the direction of the conclusion, against the conclusion, like what my author thinks or believes, whatever. I'm just trying to figure out, is this piece a fact or a belief? Very nice. So we've got that statement 4. Right, number 4, our conclusion is in fact a belief. However, number 3 is given as a fact. It's like a piece of evidence of some sort. Totally. Okay. So here's something I know. I know that this boldface can't be the conclusion because it's a fact. Facts can't be the conclusion. The conclusion has to be a belief. Archaeologists and historians have long considered Pueblo Bonito the palatial residence of a chief or king. Now, this one's a little strange, right? So the sentence itself is a fact that archaeologists and historians have long considered, right? So that statement that they have long considered is a fact. That's true. The belief that Pueblo Bonito is a palatial residence of a chief or a king. Now that's a belief, right? That's a claim. So if this were our boldface sentence, we'd have to kind of consider how we're going to talk about this. Like the sentence itself, fact. The substance of the sentence discusses a claim or discusses a belief, right? And then the upfront one, Pueblo Bonito is a large ancient building, fact. We might even argue that kind of, you could start to look at things as like, is it a background fact? Is it a neutral fact? But I generally am less concerned, at least initially, when I'm kind of picking apart an argument as to what is a neutral fact or a positive fact or whatever. I just want to get a sense of the information in this paragraph. What is fact and what is belief? Because when we look at the answer choices for this or any other boldface, right? The answer choices are their own special sort of beast. So notice answer choices will say things like it's evidence, it's a claim, it's a main conclusion. It's evidence that supports, it's evidence that goes against the argument. And so the answer choices in a boldface are going to be sort of legalese. They're going to ask a lot more about like the form, the function, and not the actual information. Notice my answer choices have nothing to do with religious centers, with palaces, with Pueblo Bonito, with any of it. It is generic, descriptive about like the role that something is playing. Hence, describe the role or boldface arguments. Okay, so one of the things that can be really nice, or a way of handling these, is again, we read, and our first job is just to determine whether the bold is kind of a fact or a belief. Let's get it into one of its main kind of two categories. Y'all said to me accurately that this boldface, my boldface here, is a fact. Now, on my paper, right, so my goal is this is a fact. Let me go and try and eliminate some answer choices. So if on my answer choice, A, B, C, D, E, knowing that this is a fact, can I eliminate any answer choices? What do y'all think? Ooh. Yeah, it's definitely not going to be the main conclusion for sure. Question is, what about this word claim? So evidence in C and E, that's fact, fact and evidence. So evidence would work, right? That's a fact. E, evidence, that one would work. So we're going to hang on to C and E. But what about this word claim? What does claim imply? If I claim that something is true, is that me stating it as a fact or is that me stating it as a belief? What do y'all think about the word claim? Yeah. So claim is another word for belief. And so because it's a fact, we can actually get rid of A and D as well. It's a belief, right? So this thing here is a fact. Now, all I'm left to come up with is always my first kind of pass through. If I've still got multiple answer choices, my job is now to try and figure out, all right, what's different about these answer choices? Or how does this boldface piece fit into the actual argument? So let's give it a read. So we're down to just answer choices C and E. And so I want you to take a look for yourself. What do you think? Is this, right? Is this evidence that the argument is opposing? Or is this evidence that the argument, supports, or that is in support of the conclusion? And then how did y'all decide that this is evidence that is in support as opposed to evidence that goes against the argument? What's the, what helped sway you in that direction? Yeah. Okay. So one argument is that the conclusion that's following, following this sentence. Here we go. So this conclusion that's following that sentence is using that sentence as evidence. What does this word however mean though? Doesn't however usually mean like bad or wrong or something we disagree with? What do you think? Yeah, it means the same thing as but, which depending on how we use it might mean that we disagree, but generally words like but or however are more of a change in direction than a disagreement. And so in this sentence, or in this paragraph, the word however indicates that what we were saying before, there's going to be a sharp turn. So Pueblo Bonito, it was this large ancient building, and people used to think it was a palace. However, meaning change in direction. They must not think that anymore. Why not? Well, researchers didn't find any evidence of what we expected for a palace. Therefore, meaning as follows, it must be a religious center. And so this is a statement that would provide support for what we're arguing the main conclusion is. Okay, so this is our job. First step is I usually just try to decide, okay, is this thing a fact or a belief that can then help me try and determine if the argument has a singular conclusion, because it'll always come from a belief, and maybe more importantly, if the bold itself is that conclusion. The thing that gets a little trickier with these arguments is that they tend to have no clear, obvious single conclusion, or they might have more than one conclusion, or the arrangement of the argument can be a little more complex. So we're going to do another example. We're going to stick with just one bold. We'll move up to two bolds in a second, but we'll stick with just one bold for this one. But again, what I'd love for you to do is take a moment to read the whole passage and first just decide, is this thing a fact or a belief? And does that allow me to eliminate any answer choices? Then with what's left, I'll go back and sort of see how I'm being asked to identify this single sentence. Give this one a go. And I'll let a timer kind of hold for you. So you can see about how long. Our goal is about 2 minutes. All right, so that's the 3-minute. I'll go ahead and stop us here. So again, when we're looking at like an average of 2 minutes, that might mean that we run a little long on some, a little faster on others. And kind of if we are struggling with a question, be ready to maybe flag it. And then if we have time at the end of the section, come back and relook at it. We don't want to spend forever on it. So I've only got a couple of answers in, so hit me with a guess. Right, if you're here with me live. We have a single bold. And so the first question is that bold a fact or is that bold a belief? What do we think? Fact or belief? Yeah, absolutely. It says observing that the female of the species can do this thing. Okay, well, that's the bold is a fact. Does that allow us to eliminate any of our answer choices? What do you think? Any of our answer choices? Yeah, so it's not very many, but it could help us eliminate one, right? It could allow us to eliminate a single answer choice. In this idea of fact and belief, it is certainly not the new conclusion. So it's definitely got to be a fact. Identifies a cause. A cause could be a fact. It offers confirmation of a contested assumption. Maybe like a confirmation of something could be a statement of fact, evidence. And then if it just says provide support, kind of who knows, right? Like that one could go either way. So this is not great, right? Like we can't get rid of quite as many. But now our job is to figure out, right? Because we've got this, I need to figure out what the structure of the argument as a whole is. Right. So like what is going on? Help me out with kind of what's going on in this argument as a whole. It's sort of similar to our structure from the last question. That up front, right, we've got kind of a one belief, right? In the previous question, it was that Pueblo Bonito was a palace. Here, they attributed the malady, right, this malaria, to poisonous gases coming from the swamp, right? So people thought that you got malaria from gas. In the 1880s, however, doctors figured out that it actually wasn't gases, it was mosquitoes. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that, oh no, it wasn't poisonous gas, it's actually a mosquito. So the correct sort of cause and effect would be that mosquitoes cause malaria. And this was due to the fact, this was after observing that the female of the species can carry this thing to unsuspecting humans. So it would appear that the sort of argument is around a new interpretation, which we sort of saw in the answer choices, this idea of like erroneous conclusion or a new conclusion, right? So we've got like kind of a new conclusion, and that our bold is here to support that new conclusion, right? The bold is the evidence that allowed doctors to determine this new conclusion. So it does certainly provide support, right? Does it provide support for an explanation? Maybe. It feels okay. I would certainly leave it. So the other thing you want to get into the habit of doing on your paper is leaving answer choices if they seem okay. Like I might be like, yeah, okay, that one's okay. We've eliminated E. It presents evidence that no, this doesn't seem to be here as evidence to contradict an established fact. This is evidence to go against an earlier belief and support our new, apparently beliefs. Let's get rid of B. It offers confirmation of a contested assumption. I might leave it, but that would mean that like this assumption that mosquitoes cause it is the contested assumption. And it seems like that's the new one. Yeah. So this like our prior conclusion is now changed. And does it identify the cause of the erroneous? Oh, no, this would be the support for the new conclusion. And so for all of these, we want to sort of say, all right, is this offering confirmation for a contest? No, this is offering confirmation of the new conclusion, which sort of best fits with answer choice A. Notice again, what we're looking for is a better understanding of the structure of the argument rather than the story itself. Right? Like, how are the different pieces and parts of the argument working together? Right? How are they layering in and on one another? And then where do the bolds fit in? All right, we're going to step up the difficulty. Yes. We'll step up the difficulty in now 2 bolds. So our job is still to figure out, again, I'm always going to go first, like reading and trying to understand. And the answer is A. Yes, exactly. So I'm always going to go first. I'm going to read the whole passage. And at most, I'm trying to determine if those statements are facts or beliefs. And I'm going to try and use that to eliminate some answer choices. From there, I'll go back and fight it out a little bit more. So here we go. Give this one a go. All right. If you have not, hit me with a guess. Tricky. This one's tricky, huh? I've only got one guess in so far. So let's start first with whether the bolds, see if we can help us get rid of anything, whether these two bolds are facts or beliefs. So first bolds, scholars have documented that some high Renaissance painters use pinhole cameras. That sounds like a fact. And the second one, painting from a projected image requires only an insignificant, well, now hold on. To say that painting from a projected image requires only an insignificant amount of additional skill, that feels a little opinionated. Right? That's a belief. I would argue that this might be an opinion. So finding, that's a fact. Finding, that's a fact. Claim, ooh, that one's not. So we can get rid of C. Evidence, evidence. Ooh, okay, so the second one is an opinion. So a claim, a conclusion, a claim, a position. Okay, so we can't really eliminate any on the second bold, unfortunately. But we did get rid of at least one. So now we're down in a 1 and 4. So even if we had to guess right now, that'd still be a better guess than if we had guessed from 5. Now I have to understand the argument. And I noticed that, answer choice B talks about like the second is a conclusion. The second is the position. Right, which means I need to find out if the second piece is the author's conclusion. And what do y'all think? So here are my sentences. My sentences start, there's only 3. Well, and so I'll say that it starts as 4 different ones. I've got the M, many people, blah, blah, blah. Then I've got a sentence that starts with thus in green. And then I have our bold in yellow. So in the chat window, I want you to let me know which of these 3, because I know the fact can't be our conclusion, right? Scholars can't be the conclusion. So which one of these is our conclusion? The blue one, the green one, or the yellow one? Which of these is our conclusion? Yeah, and they're really kind in this one. They give us a really nice conclusion word. They say thus. This is our conclusion. Thus, people who credit high Renaissance painters with superior skill are wrong. They're wrong. Therefore, they're wrong. So the second isn't the conclusion for anybody, right? It's kind of an add-on. Painting from an image requires only an insignificant amount of additional skill beyond that needed to trace it. And so it can't be the conclusion. It will be something that works either like for the conclusion or something along those lines. So we can get rid of B. Second is that conclusion. Or the second is that position. So we get rid of B and E. And now we're left with A and D. And generally, if I'm down to 2 or 3 choices, I'm going to compare them directly in critical reasoning. So the first is a finding used to support a conclusion that the argument rejects, versus the first is evidence that forms the basis for the position that the argument seeks to establish. And the second is a claim that supports that conclusion. The second is a claim presented to solidify that position. So it looks like the second bold is the same in both of these answer choices. The second bold is, the second is a claim that supports a conclusion. The second is a claim presented to solidify that position or conclusion. And so what I've got to figure out is the first a finding used to support a conclusion that the argument rejects, or is the first evidence that forms the basis for what the argument agrees with? And this idea that scholars have documented using pinhole cameras, so essentially like cheating, seems like it supports what the author eventually is going to say, which is that these people don't have superior artistic skill. And so the first is evidence that forms the position that the argument is going to agree with. And therefore, it's not what the argument rejects. So it's not A. It is, in fact, answer choice D. Process of elimination. Process of elimination. Lots and lots of process of elimination. But again, I'll still go through and try to see if I can utilize any fact or belief. I can't always, but it's still worth a shot. Still worth a shot. All right, let's try another. Here we go. Give this one a go. All right, a little bit trickier. Kind of a weird, weird problem. So give me your guesses if you haven't yet. Mm-mm. Okay, so first bold, he has no job, let alone a university position. That's some sort of fact. Not really sure what it does, but it's certainly a fact. What about the second bold? Mathematicians clearly form a tightly knit community. Fact or belief? Yeah, if we have to say clearly, that usually means believe, right? If we have to say it, that usually means that it's not a fact. All right, so belief or opinion. Okay, let's take a look. First, an observation, evidence, specific example, counterexample, judgment. Oh, well, it's definitely not a judgment, right? It's a fact. And so a fact is not a judgment. And so we can get rid of answer choice E based on one. And then the second one's a belief. Second is a generalization, a brief restatement of a view. It's a reiteration of a generalization. It is the generalization. Okay, sure. Those could all kind of work. So now I have to try and figure out, generally I'm going to think like, okay, what is, this says like a reiteration of that general. Let's just go see what the answers say. The first is an observation the author makes to illustrate a social pattern. It's evidence in favor of a popular view. It's a specific example of a generalization that the author disagrees with. It's a specific counterexample to a generalization that the author asserts. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's a lot. Understanding the first goal is really complicated. Let's go see what they all have to say about the second. So they talk about an illustrated social pattern. The second is a generalization of that pattern. Well, it seems like these two kind of disagree. The first is saying, this is this part where he like lives alone and he's refused all acclaim. The second is the author trying to say, but mathematicians actually are part of a community. There's something that feels like they're in opposition a bit. Right? So if the first is an observation that the author makes to illustrate a pattern, the second would not be a generalization of that pattern. It would be the opposite. And so these two don't fit together as a pair. The first is evidence in favor of the popular view expressed. Ooh. There's not right? Like the popular view expressed in the argument, right? This, in reporting, the press unfortunately has reinforced this popular view. So yeah, maybe it is evidence in favor of the popular view. But the second isn't a brief restatement of that view. The second is the opposite of that. So be careful. The second is the opposite. So now we're down to this weird language of this. The first is a specific example. And the first is an example of a generalization that the author contradicts. The first is a counterexample to a generalization that the author asserts. Wow, this is some double negatives, right? So is the first part of a generalization that the author contradicts? Yes, that is true. But it is also true, right? So it is a generalization of something he disagrees with, but it is a counter to something they agree with. So it turns out that the first half, again, is true for both of these. We have to move, right, to how the two pieces relate. The second is a reiteration of that generalization. So is the second a reiteration of the generalization that the author contradicts, or is it the generalization that the author asserts? Turns out that the second is the generalization that the author asserts. So it's actually answer choice D. Again, the most complicated part of these boldface are almost always going to be the answer choices themselves. They're dense, they're complicated. They often write things in like double and triple-esque negatives, right? And so my goal is to use fact or belief to get rid of what I can, to eliminate any answer choices as quickly as possible. And if I get turned around, I'll flag and come back with added time. Okay, flag and come back. So let's try one more. One more. Correct answer on that one, though, again, is D. And I'll still say this is maybe one of the hardest types of critical reasoning questions. So there's that too. Keep that in mind. But here we go. Let's try this last one. Okay, if you haven't yet, get me your guess. All right, so we've got our two bolds. Is the first bold a fact or a belief? This feels a little facty. Design innovations are quickly copied by other manufacturers. This feels a little facty. What about the second one? If it follows the word therefore, that certainly means a belief, right? That's an opinion and potentially our conclusion. Yeah, definitely an opinion. So the first is an assumption. Ooh, I don't know that a first is an assumption. I it feels a little too facty to be an assumption, but maybe. The first is a consideration. Yeah, phenomenon, consideration, or a factor. Those would all be okay. I might kind of have a question mark next to A. Then if we look at statement 2, the second provides a consideration to support a course of, wait, no, the second one is the conclusion. Like that is the final landing. It's not here to support something. The second presents an alternative strategy, maybe. The second is the strategy. The second describes a way to amend. Maybe the second is a factor against. Okay, it's not a fact, it is a strategy. So we can get rid of E as well from this one. So, and definitely get rid of A. So the first is that design innovations are quickly copied by other manufacturers. And so it sounds like what people do is they try to charge a whole bunch up front to make as much money as possible. However, right, we get this but. These large profits are actually what give people an incentive to copy the designs. So what they're arguing is that because of this first thing, and right, like what people often want to try and do, we could do better by trying to disincentivize making copies. So we've got to try and find an answer choice that kind of fits the relationship here. The first is a consideration that helps explain the appeal of a certain strategy. Yeah, that makes sense. This would explain why, you know, they're copied quickly, so we should charge as much as possible. The first is a phenomenon that makes a specific strategy unlikely to be successful. Well, maybe. And then the first is a consideration that demonstrates why a particular approach is flawed. Okay, no, not quite here. This isn't why the approach is flawed. It's actually here to support kind of the initial strategy. The second presents an alternative strategy endorsed by the argument. That is true. And then the second is that strategy. So I need to go back and figure out what that strategy. The first is a phenomenon that makes a specific strategy unlikely to be successful. The second is that strategy. Wait, hold on. So this is saying a strategy that's going to be unlikely to be successful. No, the second is the strategy that the argument as a whole believes. And so that's going to kill off answer choice C, leaving only B. Ah, great question. You mean two answer choices, but one be true, or two statements in an argument, both be true? Yeah, so generally there will be something like actually wrong with the answer choice, with the wrong answer choices. It won't be that two answer choices are both technically correct, but one's like a little bit better or more correct than the other one. No, it is generally the case that answer choices, one of them is like only one is correct, and all of the others are wrong for some reason, right? Like that we can kind of highlight. And so in every case, we should be able to fully eliminate the 4 wrong answer choices. That's a great question. Yeah, of course. So boldface, they're extra challenging. Our goal is to try and eliminate any answer choices we can, kind of quickly if possible, right? I want to try and get rid of some answer choices. Again, I like to use fact versus belief. I find that usually lets me get rid of at least 1, maybe even 2 answer choices. Then I'm going to go back and try and more deeply figure out the argument. If I'm bailing on critical reasoning questions, these are often ones that I'll bail on because the answer choices are awfully dense. And we'll get into in the next, free prep hour, we'll start to get more into the other types of critical reasoning arguments that we'll see lots and lots of. So I want to leave you with just a friendly reminder that we've got tons of free study resources, just like this one. You can attend this live by going to our website, checking out GMAT classes free, right, at our Manhattan Prep site. You can sign up for these free prep hours. We've also got foundations of math. We've got all kinds of stuff to come and hang out with us for free. Please do. You can also attend any session 1 of a full 9-week course for free. So you can check us out and see how that feels as well. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you're located or if you're watching this on a recording. It has been a pleasure. Again, my name is Whitney. Reach out, come hang out with us. Have a lovely rest of your night and good luck with your studies.